are good. Yeah, thank you, Pat. Yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. Um, Today, this is a very brief, really, this text. It's only 4 pages, but it's actually a follow-up. I thought it'd be helpful to what we were talking about these last weeks with the Dalai Lama's introduction to the Tibetan Book of the Dead and this primary teaching understanding that he gave, that there's this one-to-one correspondence between us, our human body, and the experiences we have, and Buddha nature. So we often express this to say that, each sentient being has Buddha nature. The technical term in Sanskrit is Tathagata Garbha. Garbha means the womb, and Tathagata, gata means to go or to come. And Tata is just like, it's just knocking someone says something to you, you just hit the table. It's just this immediacy. So the thus come one, that's what they called the Buddha. And but the womb of the thus come one, what gives birth to the thus come one, is Buddha nature. So we use that term Buddha nature all the time, but no one really, we kind of throw it around with best we could do in English. But it's so precise, and I don't know it in Tibetan, but Sanskrit, there's just been so much thought and honing that's gone into these teachings and the terms. So you'll remember that what the Dalai Lama was talking about in the Book of the Dead, why you study a Book of the Dead. Of course, that's the English translation of the name. It's not really literally Book of the Dead, but it refers to aspects, they say, of Buddha nature. So they say Buddha nature has three bodies, or three kind of aspects, you might say. There's the Dharmakaya, the complete vastness of the mind. You cannot put your finger on it. There's nothing there. And the image they use often is like the sky. The sky is without conditions. It's just there. You can be talking about the space that envelops or that comprises a galaxy. You can talk about the space that comprises an atom, but it's just space. And importantly, like when they use this image of the sky, it has blue color. It has quality. It's not just sort of emptiness or a void. So there's the Dharmakaya, this vastness, and then there's the Sambhogakaya, the bliss body, it's called, or I think they also call it the body of sublime emanation, something like that. I can't remember. At any rate, it said that the Sambhogakaya is like the huge cumulus clouds that appear in this vast sky. They're form, right? But yet, as human beings, we can't grab onto it. So it's this very, subtle form. And yet, even by the existence of that form, it accentuates the vastness of the sky. There's really no difference between the two of them. You can't have the sky without the clouds and vice versa. They think like that. So you have these beautiful cumulus clouds, which is the Sambhogakaya, this subtle body, and these subtle apparitions, you might say. So it's form, and it's so helpful because we can use form because we more easily relate to form, and yet it's not form that we can grasp onto. And this manifests its ways in very skillful and yet, even sort of minor examples that I could share. You've heard me say this before, so forgive me, but it's like, if we're sitting here right now and each one of us has some sort of responsibility for the place, right? And I've got a responsibility as just being president of the legal organization of it. And someone walks in right now and has, a big handful of gold coins and says, I'm going to give this gold to White Lotus. And we're all thinking, oh, that's wonderful, I'm happy. But meanwhile, we're sitting there, and because of the level that we exist on, the next thing I'm thinking is like, ooh, what if someone comes in and steals that right now? Or what if he loses it? Or what if someone knows we have that kind of money and then sues us for falling down the stairs as they leave? Anyway, or what can I do with this gold? Where I'm going to put it here, do this, we can do this. All these secondary thoughts come bubbling out of my kind of level of understanding, right? So I can't pretend. This is the important thing. I think I relate this to Buddha's first noble truth, the truth of dissatisfaction, sometimes called suffering. We can't pretend that we're somehow pure. We can't pretend that we're like beyond these concerns, because good or bad, they're happening. And they're actually a step away from reality. So we're living in this dream world that we create that we call reality. And then we go to war over it, or we ruin relationships. So we do all sorts of things. But nonetheless, so that's just someone coming in with gold because we're in this manifest kind of situation. But when I meditate on the Sambhogakaya, when I visualize myself as a Buddha, or a Buddha up in the sky, it doesn't have to be me. But if I'm visualizing a Buddha and that Buddha has a gold crown, like they all seem to, I don't have any attachment to it. Somehow my relationship with that gold is pure, not stained by all this self-grasping and all this stuff that we can't help but not do in our ordinary state. So it's extremely skillful. You're dealing with things in their purity rather than dealing with things through your lens of ego and self-grasping. It gives it these forms of freedom, and that's the cumulus clouds. They're going around the sky. They can go anywhere they want. They're beautiful. They're active. They're billowing. They're doing all this stuff. We love them. They express the vastness, and yet at the same time, there's form. There's something there that we can relate to. It's not just feeling like adrift because, we are what we are. So that's the Sambhogakaya. And then the third aspect of Buddha nature is Nirmanakaya. This is the manifest. So we've got the vast sky, we've got the cumulus clouds, and then we have the rain falling from the clouds. That rain is just totally beneficial. It gives us water, it cleanses us, it gives us recreation, it gives us crops, it does all these wonderful things, can clean with it. So this is the pure aspect of this gross manifestation. But the Nirmanakaya, which is what they called the actual physical body that everyone could see of the Buddha. Most people looked at him, they didn't see the Sambhogakaya. The great bodhisattvas, when they looked at the Buddha, they saw Vajradhara. So the next time you see a tanka of Vajradhara, that's the Sambhoga aspect of Buddha Shakyamuni. And all of our tantric traditions and our particular tradition come from Vajradhara. So that's the subtle, profound aspect of the historical Buddha. So this Nirmanakaya is also called the deceptive body of the Buddha. So the Dharmakaya, the vast, the truth body, the Sambhogakaya, the bliss body, and then you have the Nirmanakaya, which is called the deceptive body. And I just love that because it prevents the kind of arrogance that is so destructive in human beings. My religion is true, and it may be true, but we immediately attach to that then, and then we fight over it. But because the Buddhists know that this Nirmanakaya is deceptive, they call it deceptive truth. And I just think that's so wonderful because you can't even hold on to it as absolute truth and therefore be hitting other people over the head with it, with your concept. Instead, it already points to the vastness because you can't grab onto it. You can see its nature is the Dharmakaya. There's no splitting between those three. So, all right. So the Dalai Lama, these last months, we've been talking about the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. And he relates these to ordinary human beings. And what is our ordinary human experience? We're born, we die, and there's a dreamlike period in between that the Tibetans called the Sidpa, I think, Bardo. Bardo means gap. So the gap between death and birth. Kind of like hallucinations, you might say. And the three are related. At death, after death, everything kind of like comes together, dissolves, and out of that death experience, the unconsciousness of death, comes this moment. It's called clear light, and it's very fast. It's said, though, for those who have practiced virtue, and this isn't just Buddhist virtue, anyone who has like calmed their mind through the practice of virtue and has this kind of, that moment appears to be longer and longer, which gives you a greater chance to recognize it. And as you recognize it, the mind is free because the body's gone. You can be it. That is Buddhahood. That is Dharmakaya realization. So that corresponds to Dharmakaya. And then we have all the arisings that happen, as they're so described in the Book of the Dead, of this dreamlike state in between death and rebirth. Now, we don't feel that it's dreamlike. It all appears real to us, that the manifestations start over again, building out, getting heavier and heavier, you might say grosser and grosser and grosser. And so the first things that appear are all the peaceful Buddhas. When you wonder, where's Tara? Well, there she is. Manjushri, all the peaceful Buddhas are there. And that's very comforting, you might say. But for some people, they're even afraid of that because, what's going on? I don't recognize these figures. And if we don't recognize those and join with them, which is the Sambhogakaya enlightenment, then the mind continues to develop. And the next thing that appears are the wrathful. Now, those are terrifying. And we tend to be running around in the wrong direction unless you've been trained in one where you recognize, that Vajrakalaya, for instance, is the essence of love and compassion. So this is rather rare, but this is why these trainings are so important, because it's easier to come to enlightenment at these moments than it is as a human being. At any rate, these visions continue, and they're described in the Book of the Dead, and they get all sorts of opportunities, but all sorts of pitfalls there too. For instance, it says that you see lights that are attractive. There are some dull lights, and you're kind of drawn towards them because the dull lights are not threatening at all. But you want to be following the bright lights. And don't we do that in our own life? This is about life, not death, really. You have something that's vivid and true, and it's just like, well, but the dull lights, not threatening. I'll go there. So that happens in this experience of the bardo too, eventually getting grosser and grosser and grosser until what? The manifestation of birth, which is Nirmanakaya. So this complete correspondence is the kind of like the seed of it's the greatest positive recognition, the power of the human form. And this is what is sort of our stuff out of which we can come to Buddhahood in one lifetime. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to think about. So the Dalai Lama was teaching on that, and I think that was so important, this kind of, correspondence. For us, it's such a wild time if you think about it. The Buddha didn't teach the Tantra. So again, we have these teachings of self-liberation. The basic vow is do no harm. And you're just staying away from the negativity. The monk and nuns are the highest example of this. They're just away from it all. But the idea is that you don't harm. You're just not going to harm. And, it's very powerful, extremely deep states. It says that the complete realization of this kind of do no harm mindset is actually someone who has the ability to walk through a solid wall because they've realized the emptiness of self and the reification that we do from moment to moment to moment. I am Frank, I am Frank, I'm Frank. Even I don't thinking Frank, Frank's there. Everything is just permeated with the Frank idea. It's just there. We've trained ourselves. And people should never be discouraged in meditation. I mean, look what we've done right now. All of this is totally real to us. Talk about a visualization. So, that's do no harm. But then, for full Buddhahood, we have to. It's just the way the mind is and how it appears to us as ordinary human beings. We have to take a step forward to liberate all, to start training ourselves to recognize all beings, the freaking bed bugs, as having been our mother in a previous lifetime. It's such a radical step. But of course, it's Buddhahood. It's not just being free from suffering and liberated, but it's omniscience. It's the ability to guide others skillfully. They have to do it themselves, but you have clear vision. You're like a clear mirror. You can do that. And there are these completely safe and ordinary methods of doing that, which is basically what the Dalai Lama teaches publicly. It's what Kempo teaches almost entirely publicly. It's what the Buddha taught um, almost entirely publicly also. And it's very safe because it's using our ordinary dualistic way. You don't have to have some particular insight or anything. It's a basic kind of faith that the Buddha wasn't insane. He wasn't drunk. And so you can test all of these things, these 84,000 heaps of teachings. Is patience really better than anger? You start exploring it in that way. And in our meditation, we're practicing mindfulness, calming the mind. And then with that calmer mind, we start to look into the nature of the mind. How are things actually happening? And it's a very stable process. We're in meditation, and then there's post-meditation when we're walking around, always practicing mindfulness, looking at our motivations. So the meditation, you can say, continues throughout the day, but there are formal meditations and there's post-meditation understanding. So there's this path. In times of great virtue, it's really all you need. The great stories out of the Buddha's histories, things that happened to the Buddha in ancient India. I mean, for instance, when he gave his first teaching, he came to his enlightenment. He remembered his five students who had rejected him because they thought he had gone in a worldly direction because he started taking food instead of the extreme fasting he was doing. They abandoned him. And this is not anything easy. It's not like us, saying, okay, I'm going to, I think I'll buy a Ford now instead of a Chevy. I mean, to reject a teacher in ancient India is like, we live in a kind of turmoiled culture. I mean, people are rejecting their parents all the time. But India was different. So in those times when things are very stable, these conventional, the path of the perfections, prajnaparamita, that's what you do. But the Buddha also taught for extreme situations in his own lifetime, and then for the Tibetans, they claim especially for degenerated times. It's like they believe that Buddha Shakyamuni returned as Guru Rinpoche. He tamed the demons of Tibet. You can find these maps of Tibet where I don't know how they did this because they didn't have drones or airplanes or anything, but the Tibetans drew this map of Tibet, and it's personalized as a female demon who's lying on her back. And they built taming temples, they're called, like on her wrists, on her chest, all these different places to tame down the demon. That's what they did. They made Tibet into a holy land. Lhasa means place of the gods. We're in such a different culture, and we've been doing this thing for the last 400 years that we don't even have the sensitivities. I shouldn't say that we don't have the sensitivities, but all these things just sound like pretend to us, But nonetheless, they nailed all these things down, and it was helpful. And so, in degenerate times, when everything is topsy-turvy, when virtue is seen by many people as being non-virtue, and non-virtue is seen as being virtuous, and the afflictive emotions, the things that really agitate us and that create bad karma when we act out of them, the afflictive emotions are very rough. Then this is the time for the Tantra, the extraordinary Mahayana, the same motivation to liberate all, the same faith in kind of a more than a penetrating wisdom, an all-embracing wisdom beyond wisdom. And this is the practice of the Tantra. So that's what the Dalai Lama was talking about. And we're in this remarkable time where traditional Tibet has been destroyed, and somehow the Tibetans have held it together, and they've produced, these people who were traditionally trained. Like Garchen Rinpoche's training was somewhat interrupted, but nonetheless, we have access to people who like His Holiness Chetzan Rinpoche, did a 3-year retreat after what he went through in occupied Tibet. So we're at extremely propitious time when here we are. There's something very wonderful that all of us have done, that we have the karma having coming in contact with these live teachings and these extremely powerful teachings. But at the same time, there's just so much that's not understood. Um, but that can be good. You can approach this in a fresh way. I mean, it's possible, to people can get kind of stale when they think they know everything. The Tantra will throw you up all the time. It turns you upside down all the time. And so Garchen Rinpoche gave a teaching. This is like in 2007, I think. And I was able to, through talking to one of the translators, get a copy of it. There's like 10 pages, but we just have 4 here. We have the other 10. We'll get another time. And I just cut and pasted it a long time ago when I had some little funky computer. So there's some, funny kind of formatting glitches in that, but nothing bad. But I thought it was very interesting to look at it last week and see how, he's talking about the same thing as the Dalai Lama. But I thought it'd be helpful for us to see, our own teacher touching on these topics in the way that in the way that he does. Yeah, so down to earth. This was translated first by Rosemary Vale, who that's who I got these from. She was sponsoring a visit by Rinpoche. I think this is even before he had the Garchen Institute in Arizona. So this is again 2007. And she was an actress. I think she's still alive. She was older then, but she was an actress in Los Angeles, and somehow got interested with the Tibetans. And then also was further translated, I think cleaned up by Ina Bieler. Some of you know her, Rinpoche's translator. She's Austrian with wonderful English. So I thought we'd read through this and again, this introduction to Tantra. One other example that came up the other night, something about the Tantra that is so, again, this idea of the cumulus clouds, there's some form, there's something you can relate to there rather than just being, abstract. The danger with just trying to live in the Dharmakaya for ordinary beings like us is that it can become just sort of an abstract concept. And that's not it. This stuff is alive. So the example that's given, these 3 levels of kind of practice, so the don't harm level, it's the kind of mindfulness that we practice. So when we, the bare kind of mindfulness is you close the door, right? And you do it, with mindfulness, because that's the whole thing. You're just focused on what you're doing. The bare objective reality of it, you might say. But then when we enter the Mahayana, suddenly there's all this juice. It's not just staying away, but it's trying to benefit beings. So you're doing the exact same mindfulness, but now there's more like positive momentum and weight in the mind because you have motivation. You're not just doing it mindful, which is outstanding, but you're closing it very quietly and carefully because you don't want to disturb other people. You're aware of other people. And if you just slam the door, it harms you actually, but it harms them too. So this is the Mahayana. But then with the Tantra, we're doing it the exact, for outer observer, there's no difference between these 3 things. Here you are closing the door very mindfully, not wanting to, for the benefit of all, for sure. But at the same time, you're not wanting to crush the little beings that live in the door jam. So it becomes very real. This isn't just some abstract idea. I don't want to harm people. I want to help people. Right now, right here, in the immediacy of it, this is extremely important. And that's every moment. So the Tantra really kind of brings it home in that way. So let's start with Garchen Rinpoche. First, any questions on any of that before we begin? Okay.
I actually have a question, if it's okay, Frank.
Sure.
This is Frank.
Yeah, I recognize.
Yeah, just simply, is there something more specific you could give us in terms of a specific meditation that would help clarify clarify what kind of state I want to be in at this moment of your life?
You know, this text might do that. He's going to talk about a particular meditation.
The next test. Oh,
No, yeah, the very text that we're starting on. So I think you're kind of prescient.
okay.
He's going to teach us on the basic tantric meditation, which works wherever, whenever, without even the elaborate visualizations. But so yeah, ask again. Ask again if it doesn't get answered.
Will do. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche. This is him speaking. So today, my Dharma friends, I will give an introduction into this precious human incarnation. This vehicle is this precious human incarnation is the vehicle that will bring us to the pure state of Buddhahood. And depending on the virtues we are practicing, we can use this human body to go up, because the virtues we are practicing in the human body are very powerful. But also the non-virtuous actions we are practicing, they will send us down. Those going up and going down depends on the human body. So, um, mantra, the meaning of mantra is protection of the mind. And the meaning of tantra is protection of the body. So again, it's, the cumulus clouds, it's the state of mind. That will lead us to the state of Buddhahood. So all those practices are one method to lead us to Buddhahood. Initially, one goes for refuge to the outer source of refuge, which are the three jewels. Then inwardly, one practices the three roots, which are the guru, which is Lama, the Yidam deity, and the Dakini. Having gone to refuge, one applies oneself in the practice of the three roots, that is, innerly, outerly, and secretly. It is the way of being with our body, which is the channels, the winds, and the drops. Having internalized those into practice, the results are that one will achieve the kayas, the three Buddha bodies. All those qualities are contained within everybody's body. Now, when it comes to the practice of the winds, channels, and drops, there is the condensed, the concise, the mediocre, and the extensive practice. The extensive practice would be the 6 yogas of Naropa. We'll go back over some of this. First, one meets with a guide, a teacher who has experiences in those practices. If one doesn't have the experience of meeting with those teachers and just goes ahead with the practice, then great faults can arise from that. Through these practices, great qualities can arise, but also great faults will arise. And for that reason, those practices are secret. The practices of the winds, channels, and drops are secret practices. In the 6 practices of Naropa, in the extensive version, one practices them for about 13 years. And then, if one practices, one can accomplish the siddhis, the powers, especially realization, within one lifetime, just like Milarepa did. In a mediocre case, one practices them for 5 or 7 years, or one can practice for 3 years. When one practices for 3 years, one gets an approximate understanding of how the practice works. There are actually, these days, people who are doing these practices. You can ask many masters like Traga Rinpoche who are doing those practices, who have acquired great gifts. Traga Rinpoche was the retreat master at the Garchen Buddhist Institute. So, when Zhiravka comes here, Traga Rinpoche was her retreat master. So, you can see how this emphasis on the body just completely kind of brings us down to earth. I mean, we're soaring high with the Tantra, but we're immediately down to earth because we're talking about the body. And it prevents this kind of abstract false refuge that people do. Um, it's amazing to me, the the reality of it, so to speak, the down to earth earthiness, the no baloney that goes in with these seemingly vast mental practices. It's such a lesson because it's like when someone gives you the nundro to do. So the nundro practices are the practices that are done before you begin the tantra traditionally. And there people are familiar so much with the 100,000 prostrations that you're done. You're taking refuge in the three refuges and the three roots 100,000 times. And every time you take that refuge prayer, you go down and do a full prostration. And then you get up saying the bodhicitta prayer, I'm going to liberate all. So you do that 100,000 times. And then you do another 8,000 just to make up for the mistakes that you did in the 100,000. So it seems so completely, like I think it was Lama Tarchin's wife who joked, this is like she was American, she is American. He said, this is like weight loss through Dharma, you know. And yet the effect of it is something different because, it's affecting your mind. And not just in the sense like you're, at Planet Fitness doing whatever we do. I mean, it's a wisdom practice, but you never know it because we have this arbitrary idea of alienation. Here's my mind out here and abstract thought, and here's my body right here, and there's just a split. It comes from this, culturally, my belief that we have this image of human beings here and God up here. Now, in our modern way, we've sort of done away with God, so there's like nothing up there. People fill it up with whatever they want, whatever delusions. It's really something. But we still have that idea of a split. Now we have rational thought up there, The idea that the body is wisdom and that everything that we need is in our body. We just haven't found it. It's just mind-boggling because we believe in a dualistic split, There's something out there, a God, and we're here. Never the twain can meet. We have to do whatever we're told, so to speak. The rational mind does the same thing. We're being rational all the time, but everything's going to hell. And they can't understand. So this is a complete unity. It's your nature is not other than what we are. We just don't know completely what we are. So there's that. It's so interesting. And there's a verse from in the Pali Sutras too, of the Buddha saying that you touch the infinite with your body. And that's a sutric teaching. It's not a tantric teaching. But there's something so vast and, engaging about that because it just sort of upsets our ordinary assumptions. Okay. These practices are one method to lead us to Buddhahood. It's not a million different practices. We're practicing really one thing here. Can be, Tara here, Vajrakalaya here, who knows? But it's really the same thing we're practicing all the time. This recognition of our Buddha nature, and again, not in some abstract way, but in a way that's right here, right now. So this practice, this is where the tantric teachings seem to differ on the outer appearance too, because the whole Buddhist world takes refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The three refuges, this three source of refuge. And what is refuge? Refuge is protection from suffering. But the Tantra adds an inner aspect to that, which is the Lama, the Yidam, the visualized deities, and the Dakinis. So again, this is making things very kind of powerful because the Lama is the source of blessings. The Yidams is the source of power of cities. And the Dakinis are the source of enlightened activity. So suddenly we're active. And of course, that's one of the reasons that this is powerful, because we're naturally, we're by evolution, we're just set to be active. And the ordinary do no harm or the meditations, is a little bit as artificial. It doesn't seem that way. We're making ourselves motionless. Now, that kind of meditation happens in the Tantra too, but at the same time, it's active. So you see in the Buddhist world, when people are doing the mudra for meditation, like if you went to the Zen center here, you'd have the left hand on top, resting gently on top of the right hand. And why? Because the left is female wisdom and the right is active male. And so in our ordinary view of ourselves, our dualistic view, well, it's Frank meditating, right? And Frank, if he went to his extremes, is going to do things wrong. So his active side needs to be a little bit controlled by virtuous practices, by knowledge, and all sorts of things. So with what? With wisdom. So we're repressing. We have the wisdom on top. It's not suppressing really, but it's on top. So we don't get out of control with our normal reactions and what we do. It's a powerful symbolism, but I believe there are also inner psychic reasons for doing that. But in the Tantra, we got the right on top. And why? Because our actions now are enlightened. We're practicing pure vision. We're practicing ourselves as a Buddha. But of course, with all of these manifest protections, samayas, the bonds of trust, the bonds of the vows of commitment, the often confession and repentance, and the purification when we goof up, because we're goofing up all the time. But the Tantra recognizes that. And so now suddenly we're doing seems arbitrary, seems false. The teacher is not just someone who's a little bit farther down the path or a wonderful teacher that we can learn from like in high school or college, but instead is an actual Buddha. And that is transformative because we fall out of that vision all the time. And yet the fact that even generating it once, that doesn't happen with ordinary sentient beings. It's just like this momentary crack in this globe of ignorance that's surrounding us. So, 3 more refuges, and I think we need all the help we can get. Buddha Dharma Sanghas is horizontal, but the Lama, the Yidam, and the Dakini is vertical, and you'll see that in the tankas of the refuge tree and that. He's talking about having gone for refuge, one applies oneself to the practice of the 3 roots. Again, Lama, Yidam, and Dakini. So how do we do that here? Well, Lama practice, Guru Yoga there's said to be 3 ways of coming to Buddhahood. There's the purification, just removing all the negatives. There's positive, you're just building merit. Merit doesn't even exist in Western culture. This is a hard thing for us. We had someone here who actually later ended up sort of in the head of a little Dharma center. And she came to me once and she just said, I can't handle this thing on merit. It sounded like some people were better than others. This is just really, really difficult for her in a spiritual sense. But of course, practically it isn't. When I have a problem with my car, I take it to somebody who has more merit than me, someone who knows more, has experience with it, can tell me where I'm going wrong. It's not really a problem at all, but it's a measure of our abstract thinking. We think the highest, more abstract it is, the higher, right? Not true. So we've got purification of the mind. The greatest practice on this in our tradition is Vajrasattva, the great purification practice. Then we have the accumulation of merit. That is like sort of condensed into the mandala practice. We do that prayer every Sunday, but there's elaborate practices of 100,000 accumulations, building the mantra and then dissolving it, all sorts of things. And then the direct transmission mind to mind called Guru Yoga. So we're lucky. We have all 3 of those. But this is the function of the guru, the source of the blessings. And this is really a wonderful thing because, truthfully, you don't need to know anything else. There are all sorts of stories of great practitioners throughout history who, just with this tremendous confidence, it's not a blind faith, out of the virtue that they've done in their previous lifetimes, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. There's this constant kind of, training. And then lo and behold, this direct, it says that the guru is like Guru Rinpoche has this hook and can just grab you. The student with big faith is like an iron circle, iron ring, and the guru can just grab that ring. The example that we have in our own tradition, Jitgen Sumgun, saying that it's like the guru is like a snow mountain, and the warmth of the disciples' devotion melts the ice and it flows to you as blessings. Garchen is talking all the time about our mind. It's of one nature, but it's either frozen or it's liquid. That's all it is. We're just melting the frozen mind that we have already. So that's the guru. The yidam is the source of cities, the source of power, the source of realizations. And this is your Lama taking the form of various Buddhas. And there are empowerments that protect you in this way. There's the lung, the transmission of the teachings. There's the secret menak, the secret teachings that are not in the text. All these are protections. So you can't just have some entrepreneurial guy come, scoop these up, and then start selling it and doing a whole lot of damage. Because we're using not only our loving kindness and compassion, we're using not only our forbearance, just staying away from evil, and we've also taken the step of using attachment to some degree, our loving kindness and compassion. I mean, we have that, and now we're expanding it in the conventional Mahayana. You take the love that you have for yourself, you have the love that you have for your pet, and now you're loving another pet that isn't yours. And you're seeing, you're expanding in that way, eventually all sentient beings. So that's extremely powerful. But in the Tantra, we're not only using love, we're using jealousy, we're using arrogance, we're using hatred. And we all know the power of hatred. I mean, it's just dynamic. How do you do that without harming? You can only do it when there isn't other sentient beings. And so this is pure vision. The other beings are bodhisattvas. But all of this seems very complex and all of that, but it's actually very straightforward. That the guru, the same simple faith in the guru, becomes the yidam, the visualized Buddha. And then you visualize yourself as that Buddha. Think how powerful that is. You're putting those things together. Suddenly, this is your experience. I mean, we have all done an incredible job, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. I don't have to work at thinking I'm Frank and thinking that I'm, some sort of independent entity running around here. I'm thoroughly trained in that way. Now think how many mind moments you've put into your life. It's incalculable. Holding that basic assumption, that unexamined assumption. The power of the conventional Mahayana is that we look into that for the first time. And oh my God, I can't find Frank in there anywhere. I never looked. And so it's very, very humbling. But at the same time, you start to get a taste of some vastness in there too. I've been trying to cling on to this little corner of reality that I've carved out. Bigger than that. So, but now, think if you spent all those mind moments thinking of yourself as Vajrakalaya, with the hung, the seed syllable, his heart. Eventually, you start from some moments you can sort of feel yourself as that Buddha, even though you're still aware that I am feeling myself as this Buddha. But instead of it being totally dispersed, which is our natural state, isn't our natural state, but I mean our natural samsaric state, for the first time, first we've made it just into a conceptual idea and we find ourselves doing it, but again and again and again, and you're doing the mantra because that's what Vajrakalaya says. So you're doing all these kinds of things. It's kind of like a great actor taking on the role. You know, you see Laurence Olivier, and one moment he's Othello, and the next moment he's some, pawnbroker who's, a racist. I mean, you can take all these different forms. There's a fluidity there. I remember once seeing, actually, it was Professor Thurman, who came to the Zen Center. The Zen Center had its own kind of issues, but nonetheless, he was accompanying a Tibetan geshe. Tara Tulku was his name, Tara Tulku, and he was teaching on compassion. And somehow there was a question and answer period, and someone asked Thurman some question, and he responded in really a great way. He was talking about, I think, they were asking about Vajragini because no one at the Zen Center had ever heard of any of these, tantric deities, and especially so. I think it kind of threw them when they had this, this example of Vajragini because here she is, she's female, she's naked, she's totally red in color, she's got a pig heads growing out of the right side of her neck, her hair is on fire, she's holding a skull cup upside down, it's a human skull cut off top upside down, full of blood. She's got a copper razor sharp hook knife that she's doing who knows what with. She's dancing. She's dancing on a corpse. And, it's hardly a picture of peace. And so someone asked Thurman some question about that. And for an instant, he just sort of manifested as Vajragini in his question, with a high pitched female voice. And I just loved it because it just knocked the socks off of everybody in the sense of they were all right there in the moment. All these Zen people talking about being here in the present, and yet they were all there thinking all these things. And the next thing you know, he did it. So this is the manifestation of our Buddha mind. It's tremendously wonderful. But nonetheless, that's, the Yidam we practice in that way. And then the Dakinis, enlightened activity. And so here we are, at White Lotus doing Achi once a month, the great Dakini. Dharmakaya, completely enlightened figure, but nonetheless, the enlightened activity aspect. So there's tremendous kind of sense in all of this. And the happiness of it is that it's non-conceptual sense. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to make it work. We've received this like this stream of blessings from these incredible practitioners. When the four of us were in Tibet, we went to my brother-in-law came with us too, and he and his wife are really great. They're not Buddhist, and they had always wanted to go to Mount Everest. And so I don't know, somewhere along the line, I had sent them something about Mount Kailash in Western Tibet. And somehow it just sort of triggered something in Rolf, my brother-in-law, because he suggested it. He out of the blue, we were thinking about going to Tibet, and he contacted us and said he was wondering if we'd ever want to go to Tibet. So we did. So we made one trip. They were just wonderful because a lot of Tibet, especially if you're not Buddhist, well, all of Tibet, is like walking through so many monasteries. And if you're not, a practitioner, I'm sure they all start looking the same, and yet they never complained. And and it's rugged. I mean, the stairs aren't even. It's like it's medieval. But they wanted to see Mount Everest, so we made this side trip, sort of extensive, to go Mount Everest from the northern side. And there's one place you can get within a certain distance of it, and you can see Everest there, and there's some Chinese tourists, and there was no hotel. They just had a big tent that you could stay in, but many different, and sort of a slab that you could that you raised off that you could sleep on. And so I find myself sleeping literally head to jowl with his feet, with Jerry Loafer's feet. We were just packed into this thing. And there was a Tibetan woman in there who was, they had a little stove that they were heating with sheep dung, and she was making tea for us. And I was so out of it with altitude sickness, I couldn't eat anything, you know. It was just, and the wind was blowing. I mean, it's just like you're on the surface of the moon because we were, I don't know what, you know, 19,000 feet. It was some ridiculous altitude. And there was a little Nyingma monastery. Get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, stumbling around, trying to find the pee box. Wild, they weren't wild, but yaks, but you know, yaks wandering through this completely surreal thing. And you see a little light up in that monastery. The conditions, the hard conditions under which these people practiced is such an expression of their faith. Because why would you do that? I mean, we've had so much fun at Dharma centers here because of the little wrinkles that happen, you know. In the old days, we've got a pretty harmonious group right now. But it used to be people were fighting about how far to open the window, whatever. There was always all this drama going on. I told two people the other night, there's a book, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's Dharma Kitchen. I can't remember the name of it. It was written by a practitioner who was a student of Chagdud Tulku. Chagdud Tulku was this great Lama who passed away. He was in Northern California, in Nyingma. He, at the end of his life, he went down to Brazil and sort of started over, built up Dharma centers down there. And so this book, Dharma, I think it's Dharma Kitchen, I'm not sure, was written by one of his students who was just talking about her experience learning, interacting with the lamas, and working at a Western Dharma center. This is in California. And how, you know, the difficulties of working together. And I think she was the one that said half of his students were what she called Dutch hippies, not those who liked rules, you know. And and so she had this story of one woman, one of the students, one of the Eurotrash, she called them when they were there. If there are any Europeans listening, please forgive us. We were just rank, immature, adolescent Americans. Our culture is very, very young. But this Eurotrash, she said, would come into the kitchen when everyone was working, getting ready for a big event, you know, all the people working together in the food, everything, coordination. And this woman would just stand next to the light switch and be switching it on and off a million times a moment, you know. And everyone would get outraged. And they'd run to the Lama because they wanted him to be Big Daddy and spanker, you know. And he would say, oh, she's your mother, previous lifetime. You have to be patient with her. Not the answer they wanted to hear. So I'm sorry, I'm going to tell one other story. So one of Lama Tarzan's first retreats, he rented Mount Baldy Zen Center. The Zen folks took a month off, and Lama Tarzan rented their place. And he somehow appointed me to be the foreman of the work, because there was a work period every day, you know, to get things done. And they had this, you know, California, they had this beautiful kind of like quasi open air dining area. You know, they had a tent over it, and in some parts kind of like a screen, like fabric screen, like a mosquito screen, but other times just open. And there was a kitchen attached, and you would come out and tables there. And so our daughters were there with us. And little Tracy, someone was walking through in preparation and had a gallon jar of maple syrup and dropped it. And the glass broke, maple syrup everywhere. And on the rebound, a shard of glass cut my daughter Tracy. And she just totally freaked out. You know, she was just screaming and inconsolable. And she's one of those people, when that happens, you just need to leave her alone. But of course, this is a place everyone's thinking about compassion. You know, yeah, dozens of people, I'm exaggerating, but all sorts of people descending on her wanting to help. And she was like basically spitting in their face, you know, it's like, get out of my face. She wasn't with the program. At any rate, so Gretchen took Tracy away, and there I'm looking as the work supervisor, seeing all this maple syrup on the floor and broken glass. And so I gathered one guy who was on the work team, you know, and I had met him just in this retreat. And I said, you know, Fred, or I don't know his name, I shouldn't say Fred, you'll think I'm talking about Fred Kettner. It's not that. George, would you be so kind, I'm being Mr. Diplomatic, you know, would you be so kind as to come over here and mop up this unfortunate incident. And he looks at me and he says, "Fuck you." I'd been at a Western Zen center. Everyone followed the rules, but this guy wasn't playing the game. So as he said that to me, I was totally stunned. I was just like looking at him, and it just stopped me. I was like frozen. The instant before he said that, looking over his shoulder, Lama Tarchan was coming out of the pee box. He had been in the porta potty, and he came out just as this happened. And he saw the whole thing, and he realized I was looking at him, but George didn't know the Lama was behind him. And Lama Tarchan, you people in Zoom probably can't see it, but he just looked at me and went, totally de-escalated the situation. And it was so wonderful because, instead of that moment of hurt and then the next moment of righteousness, you SOB, clean up that shit. You know what I mean? That's where we go. You totally pulled the rug out of it. And it's just this training of the mind. Lama Tarchan, I don't know, but I'm sure he wasn't going through a checklist in his mind. What should I do in this situation? Totally spontaneous. Our nature is not only spontaneous, but it's compassion. It does the right thing. But we kind of hinder it. Good question. Pat just asked who cleaned up the syrup. Somebody did. It was wonderful. Yeah, it was a totally wonderful time, seeing the interactions there too. We Gretchen had worked it out so the kids could come in for certain sessions. They weren't there all the time. We had a babysitter for them and stuff. But they would come in, and Gretchen had a busy box for them, and they were like coloring and things, trying not to be bothered. And then we got complaints. The Lama was getting complaints from people that girl over there is using her marker, and she's upsetting my meditation. Meanwhile, it's Mount Baldy Zen Center. It was like not a meditation hall, but nonetheless, the interactions with the Lamas, all those things were just so completely helpful. And then at one time, when people were Lamas are different. Some Lamas, you're playing the instrument wrong. We had one Lama say, "Please just stop. You need to be thoroughly trained in that. Don't do that." But Lama Tarchan was the opposite. He says, "Just jump in and go crazy." And so Tracy was playing the bell in the Damaru. And in the middle of this, it was a practice, but it wasn't like, it was practice. He suddenly stopped everything. And he told everybody, "Look over at that girl. She's playing like an old practitioner. She didn't have any self-consciousness about it. I'm there like, it's like things going wild." It was just wonderful. But this is the teachings of, great teachers. It's teaching without teaching, like that. All right, so that's the first paragraph of this page. Sorry, once again. But we have some here for people who want them, and we did post one for the Zoomers. So we'll be going through this. It's really very brief, but I love it because it's our own teacher, elucidating basically on what His Holiness Dalai Lama taught, and had been going through for the past few months. Okay, any questions before we cease and desist?
You mentioned Achi earlier, just briefly, and I was wondering if you could touch on the significance of the horse.
Oh,
And it's blue, right?
yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
blue
it's a
turquoise.
little off topic,
Right.
sort of, but not really.
I don't know for sure, but I think it's the swiftness. Achi is known for her swiftness of her response. And I'm guessing, this is just my own inference, that the horse, obviously, if you're in Tibet and you're trying to get someplace fast, you need a horse. So that's what I think, but I don't know. We should ask Kempo. He'd know. Yeah. Swiftness. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of my jokes with the Tibetans. When you're spelling, the Tibetans, the way they spell each part of the letter, and the horse is ta, pronounced Tibetan, ta in Tibetan, and so it's nice, just one little syllable, but it has a ra, which is like a little hat sitting on the, and they have all these silent consonants. So it's mind-boggling to read unless they transliterate it the way that we can do it easily. But when they spell something, they put even the unspoken parts in there, and then they go ra ta ta ta, and then they repeat it. So ra ta ta ta. I've always liked that for the horse. The Tibetans will laugh when you say that because they're not expecting you to be able to spell. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm happy for everyone to be here. I think this would be very valuable. Lama Garchen Rinpoche's um, um, elucidation of kind of these fundamental kind of tantric meditation and teachings. And again, with some of the explanation already, it's so important to understand. It's powerful. You can go up very fast, but because it's powerful, you can go down very fast with it. It's nothing to take lightly, but that doesn't mean that we're wearing a sour face and all of that. We are so fortunate that the protections that come in a lineage like this is just for that reason, to protect us from our own kind of mistakes. And there are just many, many ways of purifying and correcting mistakes too. So it's not to be fearful, but to be, justly, it's like if you have a shotgun, you got to be aware that it can be misused, and you're just paying attention to the proper methods and all of that, but you're aware of the power instead of just this, silly kind of confidence, like nothing can happen to me. Yeah, another question from Rogo. No, that's all right. That's all right.
This is going to be slightly complicated. I'm so sorry. It seems to me, from my experience, that the Dharma is very inclusive and accepting of everyone, and there doesn't seem to be anyone who is a chosen representative of the Dharma. Is that the case? I mean, it seems like the Tibetans have they seem to be a culture of where the Dharma has seeped, and they seem to be kind of disseminating that around the world. But are they considered better? I mean, do they just have a better ability to understand? I just was wondering, are there specific, like in the Judeo-Christian world, they have the Jews are the chosen people, that kind of thing, and they have this innate sort of relationship with God. Is there anything that exists like that in the Dharma, Frank?
Well,
that you know
you hear the Dalai Lama speak about India. What amazes me is, I think, what I consider the tremendous accomplishment of the Tibetans, and yet they look to India as the land of the Buddha. So to have that kind of, yeah, I think accomplishment, truly, and yet not somehow. I mean, for us, it's like if you hang around in universities, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of arrogance. It's just how it is. And, we can see that in our own mind too. It's so easy to be impatient with your kids just because you know more than them. I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to me and my kids. I mean, it's just, it's how we've trained ourselves. And think how remarkable that is. I mean, Americans, we think of ourselves as we go around the world just pushing everything on our stuff and everybody else. And sometimes that's not bad, I don't think, but at other times it's just the unexamined quality of it. And so when I think of the Tibetans, when you know the respect and regard that they have for the Dharma, that somehow they haven't become just the most insufferable jerks in the world. I mean, an example of them going, you don't see them going around and woe is me, and the Chinese took our country away. And there's still terrible things happening in Tibet, but you never hear them doing like that. That's, to me, I think it's a real message of where real peace lies in this world, if you can do it. So no, that's a wonderful thing. You see the humility of Dalai Lama. All these, it's just amazing. But with that humility, there's kind of an openness that allows you to enter into, that mind. That's wonderful. There's a famous story of, a very accomplished kind of guy. I can't remember what he was. He was either a samurai or some great poet or something like that. And he comes to see a Zen master. And the ritual is they're going to bring in tea, and there's his tea cup and master's tea cup, and the attendant pours the master's tea, and then the master says, "Oh, I'll take the pot. I'll pour it for our esteemed guests," and starts pouring the tea, and it's filling up, filling up, filling up. Pretty soon it's full. He just keeps on pouring. It's overflowing. And this is Japan, where you're not going to have any emotional outbursts. Suddenly the guy just can't take it anymore. He just says, "Stop, stop! No more tea will go in the cup." And he said, "Just like your mind, so full up with your opinions, your arrogance, all this stuff, won't take any more. You have to empty the cup." It's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Keen has a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead and unmute, Keen.
Oh, I was just gonna say, didn't Perseus rode Pegasus to save Andromeda from the Kraken, which
Oh,
is very similar to.
I kind of like that. So yeah, maybe Hachi was Perseus in the form of the dream.
So they were. It seems like,
It-
but it's,
it-
it's
yeah, yep. I mean, I don't know. There's interesting
right.
ideas, but certainly there's a lot of wisdom in those traditions for sure. Okay. All right. In that case, we dedicate the merit of this evening to all motherly sentient beings. May each and every last one know their freedom, and may each and every one of us not cease in our efforts until that is so. Sva. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah.